stop.
Abdul Carter was there to introduce himself.
And look at him bounce off tacklers.
He's got another touchdown.
There are a lot of guys that are ready to plug in and play, and a lot of guys with versatility.
He is a really good young starter.
Down quick cross. Higgins, touchdown. Throws back in the end zone. Caught. Touchdown.
He breaks another tackle. Godwin down the sideline. Touchdown, Tampa Bay.
I would be shocked if he didn't get big money from someone.
Welcome to 40s and Free Agents. I am Greg Rosenthal. This is Daniel Jeremiah, and this is a limited series going through draft season, and we arm wrestled to decide who was going to speak first, and people don't know this about DJ, but very short arm length, so I got to go.
Wow, that's an interesting tale there. We've seen in the history of this country, enemies come together and join hands and find common ground. None more challenging than this relationship coming together. But that's what happens with the NFL offseason, Greg. When you've got free agency in the draft, it's coming together.
Yeah, it's like I'm the pro personnel side with no experience whatsoever,
Yep.
and you know the college game. And so, no, we thought it'd be fun to come together during this season. I call it the regular season, the build up to free agency, and then your season draft. And we kind of compare the two worlds and decide how these teams are going to be built. I'm excited about this.
No, I'm excited about this in a big way. I'm also excited about Greg's watch. Wow. I don't know what they are paying over NFL Daily, but that is impressive.
This was a gift. Thank you. And yeah,
nice.
You can check us out on YouTube, on NFL Network if you're listening to this. Let's go to my top 10 free agents list. And I got to admit, the list looked a lot better before T. Higgins and Trey Smith got the franchise tag, because now Milton Williams is number one, and it kind of feels like that year where Eric Fisher went number one in the
from a free agency equivalent, yeah.
Or when Malik Jackson was actually my number one free agent about 7-8 years ago. We got Ronnie Stanley with the Ravens. Zach Bond is now re-signed, so Sam Darnold moves up the list. Josh Sweat with the Eagles. Chris Godwin, Carlton Davis. A lot of good cornerbacks, I think, at the top of this group. Charvarius Ward, DJ Reed, Devontae Adams, and Amari Cooper, both coming off like shaky years there. I'm curious when you look at that list, like what do you want to criticize first?
I don't want to criticize. I want to point something out, which is sometimes when you're stacking free agents and you're looking at who the best available players are, I think people get caught up in past production versus future value, and that's what free agency is all about. And I think age is incredibly important. Now, Milton Williams, I believe, is 25 years old.
Yep.
So when you factor that in, plus he can rush the passer from the interior, which is extremely hard to find. I think there's probably some shock value to people, like casual NFL fans, to see his name up there at the top, but he is going to get a lot of money.
Yeah, the only regrets I have with this list is not pushing some more of those young guys up the list, which we'll talk about during the show. I did kind of think, just taking a big picture view of this, there's a lot of defensive players. There's a lot of three down linebackers, defensive tackles. What do you think about the theory that those positions specifically, off-ball linebacker, defensive tackle, like that's a great free agent position because it takes so long for them to develop? I think Milton Williams is a good example. Zach Bond was that, like, these are guys that maybe weren't really ready to be difference makers early in their career, but those are positions where they get a lot better and they're peaking at 25.
Yeah, it takes patience, and I think that's why there's that sweet spot of guys who have experience but are still young. Not many of them, but guys that do have experience. I go back to Patrick Queen, was last year's free agency, right? So you look at the number that he got and the impact that he had with the Pittsburgh Steelers, because he was still ascending, he was still young, but he'd played a lot of football. I see it doing the Charger games. I've seen linebackers come through there. Drew Tranquill is a great example of someone who got better as he went along. Deion Henley last year in year 2, you saw the spike take place. So I think if you're a team that has a hole at off-the-ball linebacker and you are trying to win and be competitive right now, I think there's reason to go on the veteran market.
That's the position I mentioned, because that's where there's a lot of younger starters. Nick Bolton, Ernest Jones, Dre Greenlaw's not as young.
Can Ernest Jones stay somewhere?
He's
been a good player in 3 different places at a young age. Like, it's time for him to settle in.
He's out there negotiating on Twitter with the Seahawks, like responding to negative tweets about him.
That's always a good thing.
He had an
to
injury,
do.
which is that's not a great sign. Let's talk about who has the most cap space in this entire market. And do you believe there is such a thing as too much cap space? The Patriots have $127 million, which to me is a failure. Like, That's why they spend all that money.
You don't have enough of your own players that command money, which means you're not very good, which is why they're picking where they're picking in the draft.
The Raiders have 95, the Chargers have 90, the Cardinals have 78, Commanders 64. And my issue is there's too much cap space, though.
But different reasons. So if you go through those teams, like let's take the Chargers and the Commanders. The Chargers took their medicine last year. Mm-hmm. So, think about all the dead money that they had. Keenan is gone, Eckler's gone, Mike Williams is gone. So they kind of ate that last year. So now they're freed up with some money and obviously a good bit of free agents of their own that, Khalil Mack, I would imagine they'll try and get back in the fold. Poona Ford, who played well. So some of those internal players, I think, eat up some of that money. And then Washington, that is the picture of what it looks like when you hit on a top quarterback where you can have your cake and eat it too. I mean, they have all that space and they have the most important position secured and they're paying them next to nothing.
And yet they signed so many one-year veteran free agents last year that when you look at their roster, they've got about 10 starting jobs to fill. So Adam Peters is going to earn his money this offseason. But when you look, like, more than half the league now is more than $40 million. Like, the money that's come in with this TV money, and it's much harder to find great players than it is to spend your cap space, unless you're the Saints.
Yeah.
They actually are
and
great.
And they just push it out. You just push it out into the future. The interesting thing is, I've talked to a bunch of GMs over the last, through the combine over the last couple weeks, and all of them, when I go, are you going to be aggressive in free agency? You guys got a lot of money. And like, no, we're going to wait for that second wave.
Yeah.
And they all say this, and then free agency starts, and we're all going to be like, oh my gosh, look at how much money this guy just got. But they all have the intention of being patient.
We mentioned the Chargers, so let's mention it here. Joey Bosa released late Wednesday night. Not a shock. They open up $25 million in cap space, which you rarely see anymore, like a cut, like helping you that much. But they kind of set this up a year ago, knowing it might be a possibility. Not a shock. I put him at number 56 in my top 101. I really struggled with what to do because, sure, he has a higher ceiling than almost any pass rusher out there. Like, if you got peak Joey Bosa, that's better than Josh Sweat, obviously. But he hasn't been healthy for 3 years. If you add up the snap total over the last 3 years, it adds up to about 1,000 snaps. And most of that's last year, which I don't need to tell you. He was out there not 100%, almost trying to prove he could play hurt, but he wasn't the same Joey Bosa for most of the year. There were just little flashes like early in the year.
Yeah, I think he's an example, and we'll see some others in this list, in your list here, of you're going to see incentive-laden contracts. So you're going to get asked, because you put a list together, what's this player going to get? And the answer should be, well, it's going to be dependent on how he plays, because there's going to be a base number for someone like Joey Bosa, and it's going to be heavily incentivized. If he does stay healthy, he can get what his worth is.
And I wouldn't be surprised if he combines with his brother up in San Francisco. They're looking for some edge. That would be fun. Let's talk about the strength of the draft.
Yeah.
I mean, you take it over. Your top 50 prospects is out as of Thursday.
Yeah, it's fresh off a little update here from the combine. And always some changes here once you get official measurements on these guys too. But it's a unique draft in that we don't have a quarterback until you get to Cam Ward. There's my 10th overall player. You have a running back and 2 tight ends in the top 6 players. Don't know that there's ever been a year quite like that. But if we were to go beyond what you see on the screen right here with these top 10 players and you look at the entire top 50, man, Greg, it is defensive line heavy. It is loaded with both DTs and edge rushers. You want a running back. There's premier running backs in this draft. There's depth in this class. Tight end, you see those, there's top 2 guys up there. There's tons of depth there. It's kind of a weird, draft in that regard because we've had, receivers, there's depth, but not the high-end stars that we've had in the past few years. Quarterbacks, last year we had those 6 guys go. It's nothing like that. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this marries up with your list and my list, looking at free agency, looking at the draft, and seeing how the draft is going to inform what happens in free agency.
Let's do it. Let's kind of look at. I had the top 50 list. You have your top 50 list. I had top 101. I mean, I'm working more than double as hard as
I have a top 150 that comes out before my event, but I mean, hey, that's only 49 more than you're doing. So.
We're going to be doing this show every week, so I'm looking forward to picking your list apart a little bit. Like, can Mason Graham's a top 5 guy? Can he even stay on the field on rundowns? Like, stay tuned for more of that. But when we look at the different
On rundowns, is that what you said?
Yeah, you think he's like a
Yeah, he's an unbelievable wrestler who's never on the ground, plays with leverage and power.
Never,
I mean, are we going to have this conversation already? Are we doing this now?
No, that was my first draft hot take. Looking at the different positions, you have 5 running backs in your top 50.
Did you watch the Alabama game in the playoffs last year? The year before?
I thought there were some games where like good teams actually made their plan around attacking Mason Graham a little bit.
Yeah, like Ohio State, the best team in the country that tried to attack him. How'd that go?
I mean, I am feeling the heat from having like a Michigan grad.
We did well. How long did we get along? Was that 10 minutes?
Too long.
Drew said 10 minutes. That's probably the over. I would have taken the under on that, but that's okay.
So we talked strengths of this class. You say, obviously, the defensive line.
Yeah.
I would agree that that's also a strength of
Look at those numbers.
Class. Defensive line, you have 14 in your top 50. I have 12 in my top 50.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And what does that do?
So that's where I go back to, like, I think Milton Williams may be the exception because of the age, and he's healthy and he can rush from inside. So maybe he's thinking he's going to get 20. Maybe that number is more like 15, 16, somewhere in there. But he's going to do well. But some of these other guys, like, I think you're going to see teams put the number and say, here's the number. If you want to do a deal, we'll do a deal. But we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to move off that number because of the sheer number of guys we got.
There are guys in this class, like, of free agents. Azeez Ojulari, I think, would be like an interesting pick.
Solid player.
Like Treshaun Wharton, I feel like I ranked too low. Do you question your list? They don't let me do a 2.0. I would move him up 20 spots or so.
Yeah.
I had him too low. But guys like that maybe get left behind, whereas other positions, offensive line, have such a premium. Are we at the point that offensive linemen in the draft is almost like quarterbacks in the draft? And I do it on my free agency list where I artificially put them higher just because there aren't any, and there aren't any in either space. It feels like this year at least.
Yeah, when I was in Baltimore, we had a legendary scout, Ron Marcinak, who scouted for 40, 50 years. He's since passed away. But we called him Coach Ron. And Coach Ron, one of the first things he told me in one of my first years in the league was when you're grading players, when you're grading offensive linemen and corners, whatever you watch the tape and whatever you think he is, you need to bump him up a level. Because if you don't, you're never going to get him. If you're waiting for the value at tackle or corner to match, your grade and where they are, you're never going to get them. They get pushed up. So you have to do the same thing in terms of what you're paying these guys. And in this year in particular, the tackle group, there's not a lot of starting NFL tackles, and they all go really early. So a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, people are wondering why the heck did they move off of Joe Thuney? Well, they, as you saw in the Super Bowl, have a glaring need at left tackle. And you have the center, right guard, right tackle taken care of. We need a left guard and a left tackle now. Maybe Ronnie Stanley, you could argue, makes a ton of sense for them. Go get a former Raven like they did with Orlando Brown that worked out when they had a tackle need. You go sign Ronnie Stanley. Now that's the Joe Thuney money that's going to Stanley. And now that left guard is a lot easier to find a left guard at the bottom of the first round or the second round or the third round. You're not finding a starting tackle at that point in time.
Yeah, I have actually a bunch of interior offensive linemen in my top 50 just because, again, there's not many people out there. Tevin Jenkins played a lot. Mekhi Becton has moved up there after some cuts. Like Kevin Zettler.
You got Banks.
Can play a year for you. Aaron Banks, you mentioned. Will Fries is another. Not a lot of sexy names here. I don't have a single tight end. This is a fun class of running backs and tight ends. You have 5 running backs in your top 50. You have 4 tight ends. I have a total of 2 running backs and no tight ends in my top 50.
Let me give you 2 guys. I didn't see where you had them on your list here. I do not have it in front of me. Maybe you can pull it up. But I'd be curious on like J.K. Dobbins, who I saw last year.
Yeah,
and then like Najee Harris, right? Those guys are productive players, good players, not on the high end, but because of the depth of the running backs in the draft, I wonder if one of those guys, like a player of that ilk, you could get like a real value on one of those guys.
Like, would you rather have Najee Harris for? They're throwing out that he might get $8-10 million a year. I'll maybe believe that.
I would guess. I would, without you saying anything, I would have said he was going to get $6 to $8 million a year.
I think J.K. Dobbins would get less probably. Aaron Jones is also out there.
But again, if you want to bake that in, like what if you baked in with those 2 guys? $5 million with the incentives. You go rush for 1,400, 1,500 yards. We'll get you up to the $8-9 million that you're hunting.
Would you rather have those guys, or like a second-round running back. Wouldn't you rather have the second-round running back?
Well, yeah, but it also just frees you up. You know, I think the second-round running back in terms of the youth, the little bit more explosive option, and you can really cook there. But the other thing is, man, if we have some of these other needs, we want to go get a receiver. We have a corner need. Well, let's go. We can plug and play with this back at a reasonable price, and then we can free ourselves up to go with another position there in the second round. So these are the conversations that are taking place, by the way, inside the room.
Right, because like if you're Kansas City, for instance, and where they're drafting, you can't expect to have a good left tackle.
You're not getting one. That's why, to me, they have to overpay. And that's why I don't know, because we're talking about free agency in the draft. We're not talking trades. But they've gone that route before. I just don't know you're going to find many people willing to part with a starting caliber left tackle. So all roads lead to Ronnie Stanley is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, next on the list at left tackle is Cam Robinson, or
He's a little bit throughout his whole career. He's been up and down.
A little up and down. Yeah. Dan Moore, guys. Maybe Tyron Smith comes back. Like
no,
probably not. Not something you want to go into the season with. Defensive linemen. Who I'm curious who are some of your favorites. I'm going to talk about like. When you look at the free agency class, usually guys don't get to free agency unless teams are okay losing them, which is a little bit of a red flag. Like Ojulari, I mentioned, more of a situational guy, never was consistent, like a 3-down type of guy. Tershawn Wharton, maybe just they couldn't pay him. He's next to Chris Jones. He was with the Chiefs. Onwuzurike for the Lions is a good young player, but it took a while for him.
Aleem McNeil's been paid. They have to pay Hutchinson.
Right.
Yeah.
Then you have guys coming off of injury. I would be really into Malcolm Koonce, who missed all of 2024 but played really well in 2023. Javon Hargrave is a guy who was once atop my free agent list, now coming off of an injury. DeMarcus Lawrence, like how in rooms are you managing like taking one of those guys versus the draft, like and the strength of it all?
So defensive tackles, I've had this conversation with multiple people, similar to what I've said earlier, which is we like you, you'll help us, here's the number. And it's like there's no negotiation. Like we'll take you at this number, but there's no reason for us to negotiate with you and go beyond where we're comfortable because of I've got in my top 50 number 4, 25, 27, 32, 43, 49, 6 defensive tackles in my top 50. And beyond those guys, I have another 10 plus that I feel like can come in and at least be rotational starters for me.
But what if I threw the theory out there that this is not a great draft class, and you guys who are all in the draft industrial complex staring at these guys, someone's got to go number 30, number 40, number 50. You've almost convinced yourself into that this is a good defensive line class, whereas the whole class is a little lackluster, and maybe last year they'd all be around later.
Yeah, I would say defensive tackle-wise, I'm looking at the guys right now, and it is not. There's no 280-pound guys that I'm dreaming and wishing and hoping are going to add 20 pounds. There's no 300. I'm talking about 340 guys 340-pound guys that need to lose weight. I'm not talking about guys who can't move. I'm talking about guys who are all 6'3", 6'4", 305 to 315 that ran sub 5 flat or just over 5 flat 40s. Like these guys are athletic, big athletic dudes. So, and we saw it at the Senior Bowl. It was representative there. We saw it with how they worked out. I don't think there's anything fluky or made up about this defensive tackle class.
I'm going to just keep taking shots at this draft.
No, but that's what's good. This is a healthy discourse. It does have a nice watch. It's hard to get mad at somebody who has a watch like that.
I didn't even know that was showing, but that is new.
I couldn't see for a couple seconds when the glare caught me.
It was a gift. It was a gift.
I bet it was a gift.
It was a gift.
Either that or you're running drugs.
I cannot afford that.
I don't know what's going on around here. But
sorry. Let's take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to talk quarterbacks afterwards. Try to figure out, because, look, this is the last show before free agency really gets going. By the time we tape again, a lot of these quarterback situations will be taken care of, will be placed. We'll try to figure out how that all works after the break.
Find out what's next for the top free agents on the market. Will they re-sign with their current teams or find a new home for 2025? We'll be all over it on Free Agency Frenzy with 8 hours of live coverage starting Monday, March 10th at 10 a.m. Eastern on NFL Network and streaming on NFL Plus.
All right, we are back on 40s and free agents, and we are going to talk quarterbacks. This is my time of year. Like, in a week or two, we're going to be past free agency. It'll be draft, and DJ's just gonna try to dominate this show. The quarterbacks this year, it's an interesting free agents class. It's deep. Sam Darnold, I have at 4th overall. Justin Fields, 19th. Jameis Winston, Russell Wilson, Jacoby Brissett in the 50s and 60s. Jimmy Garoppolo, Daniel Jones, rounding it out in terms of the top 100. And there's like decent backups available after that. I just didn't want to like make every backup quarterback make it. My guy Mac Jones, I mean, everyone forgot about him. He's a free agent. Joe Flacco's a free agent. Gardner Minshew is a free agent. And it's kind of figuring out at this time of year, DJ, how do you compare these guys to the draft prospects compared to the potential trade candidates, if there's any out there? Aaron Rodgers will eventually be on this list because I don't think they're going to be able to trade it. I'm going to start there, actually. Where would you put Aaron Rodgers among this entire group?
It is such a short-term move. I would, in terms of Aaron Rodgers on this list, I would put him probably a 3rd. I would put him behind Fields. I'm looking at your list right now. To me, if I look at it from a draft standpoint, who signs as a free agent that would preclude you from taking a quarterback high in the draft? And I only see 2. I think whoever signs Sam Darnold, if he were to leave Minnesota, he goes and signs somewhere, I think that team is out on taking a quarterback in the 1st round. I think whoever signs Justin Fields, I think it's likely that they wait on a let's evaluate him for a year and maybe our quarterback, if it's not him, is coming in the future. But outside of those top 2 guys, Winston, Russell Wilson, Jacoby Brissett, Garoppolo, Daniel Jones, those guys are not going to stop you if the quarterback you like is there to take in the first
I'd go further. I would say none of these quarterbacks would. You're changing your draft plan for Sam Darnold? Like, I am interested.
I don't think you're going to spend the money that it's going to cost on Sam Darnold if you're a team picking up there in the top of the draft and you plan on taking a quarterback.
But what if he doesn't cost that much money? I think as we get closer to free agency, there is a greater chance that he ends up staying with Minnesota because ultimately the market isn't that into him. The Raiders, we've heard, maybe not that into him.
I don't think he's going to the Raiders.
I actually could see the Titans being interested in him, but if you're the Titans, for instance, and you're going after Sam Darnold, have you already made the decision that you're not drafting Cam Ward? In general, have they made the decision, do you think, of what they're going to do at quarterback? And I have Sean Payton's voice in my head from the scouting combine where I believe him. He said at this point in the process last year, they didn't know they were going to take Nick.
They also weren't holding the 1st overall pick. Sure. Your homework starts a little earlier when you're holding the 1st overall pick than it does when you're sitting there and seeing who's going to fall to you and who do you like at that point in time. I would say, I don't think he goes to Tennessee. I think Sam Darnold, if I was going to guess, I would say if it's like a one-term deal, a 1-year deal, I would say, why would you leave Minnesota? If you're not going to go outside of Minnesota to chase a 1-year deal because you already know what you have there in Minnesota, it's basically a prove-it situation.
Right.
If he gets beyond 1 year, I could make a case at a place like Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh seems to me like it is Sam Darnold, Justin Fields, Sam Darnold. One of those guys would be their quarterback. And that's why a team like that, they're in no man's land in the draft to get one of these guys anyways.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think it would change. I think Fields ends up with the Jets or
I agree with that.
With the Steelers. I think the Steelers want to keep him, so that would make a lot of sense to me. I think Darnold ends up staying, and you asked before, I'll answer it now, how much it would cost. I think you maybe can get Sam Darnold for $45 million on 2 years. On 2 years,
45.
On 2 years.
So you're saying 22 and a half?
But most of it's guaranteed, like 10 of it's guaranteed into the second year where you have an option to cut him. Maybe it's fit. I just don't think with everything that GMs are looking at for this quarterback class and then there's decent backups out there, those last 2 games, I think, lost him a lot of money. Because you saw him play in the biggest of spots and he froze, and it reminded everyone why he was available 2 straight off seasons for almost no money. And so now you're giving him a raise, but you're not giving him that big a raise.
So here's my pushback on that. And I'm outed and known as a Sam Darnold fan. I was when he came out. And
leader of the Hive.
He's bounced around and hasn't worked. This is why I would push back on that. I think the Detroit game, Sam did not play well. I'm not going to run from that or hide from that. Like, he did not play well on the road in that game.
Wouldn't let go of the ball.
The playoff game, their offensive line got destroyed in that game. And I would argue that if you're going to make that case, then how do you explain what happened in the Super Bowl? And how do you not acknowledge the impact of getting destroyed up front and what that has on the play of the quarterback? And I also have a 14-game sample size. That's not a small sample of him playing it at a very, very high level when he was protected. He didn't get protected. He got his butt kicked. I don't run from that. One terrible game, I don't put the playoff game on Sam Darnold. So if we're going to talk numbers,
I would more than you would.
So my take is, I think if it's a one-year deal, again, stay in Minnesota. If you can go get a 2-year deal, whether that's Pittsburgh, whether that's wherever else is out there at that point in time, I don't if he wants to go running back to the New York market, I don't know that I'd be in a hurry to do that with the Giants instead of the Jets, but that would be at least a conversation. My guess is he gets 2 years. I'll say it's like $30 million in the first year.
Okay.
And I'll say there's a little something for the second year guaranteed. Whether that's $5 million, maybe as much as 10. But I would say just a little something guaranteed.
We're parking our car in the same garage. That's based. That's the same.
Yeah.
You just raised it a little bit. What about the guys not on this list? So Kirk Cousins, I saw a report that he wants to wait until after the draft because he
wants to see what seats get filled. Look what happened in the draft last year.
Right, but
he doesn't have the cards.
Right.
Yeah.
Can Kirk Cousins dictate? Maybe there isn't a market for him until day 3 of the draft anyways, which would make more sense to me. And I guess they would want to do right by Kirk Cousins, and Cleveland could make some sense. Who gets left out between the draft and free agency? There's too many spots that are wide open, and so...
But he's a free look.
Yes.
If he gets released...
He won't cost much money.
It's going to be Russell Wilson from last year.
Yes.
You're going to pay him $1 million because the Falcons are cutting the check, which makes him way more desirable for a place like Cleveland, who has, not a lot of money to spend because of how much they have sunk in Watson, and he has familiarity there.
I actually could convince myself more into Kirk Cousins than some of these other guys because I thought it was remarkable how productive and how well he played in games where he literally couldn't move. They figured it out for about half the season there, and now you make the case. He's a year more removed from Achilles surgery, and maybe he's a little bit healthier.
Let me ask you this question. Nobody's talked about this, but I think it's a fascinating conversation. If, let's say Sam Darnold leaves, Sam Darnold goes to the Steelers, right? So he's gone. If you're Minnesota, and here's the options, right? You have JJ. You're hoping he's going to be the guy, but you need a veteran there. You have Daniel Jones, who's been on your team last year. You have Kirk Cousins is available to come back as, buying you a little more time with JJ. Would you rather have Daniel Jones with what he's going to cost, which I would have to believe is a lot more than what Kirk Cousins because of the Falcons and the way that contract was situated? You could get Kirk Cousins back in Minnesota for next to nothing. Who would you rather have?
That's so spicy that I can't believe no one else has thought
I've never heard anybody bring this up.
Nate actually said very nice things about each other in the press.
Do you remember?
They handled that pretty well.
Can I challenge our group here? This will be post-production.
We can't stump the tape. This isn't
I
stump
know,
the
but
truck.
like maybe in post. Maybe by the time this airs.
We're a podcast primarily.
But in the time this airs, we could drop this little thing in here. Because when they played, after the game was over, I think Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins had a moment. It was caught on camera, and there is a lot of love between those guys.
Okay.
So I don't know. If I'm looking at Daniel Jones and what that market is, I don't know if that's the Minshew market. What is that, $15 million that Minshew got? Or it's Kirk Cousins saying, I'll come back and you pay me the minimum because I'm making all this money from the Falcons.
I think Daniel Jones could be the guy who, in theory, is competing with Anthony Richardson. I think Justin Fields could be that guy, but they're not going to let him. You said something very interesting in public, which got on my radar this week, which is you thought you wouldn't be totally surprised if Geno Smith got traded.
Yeah, to me, DK's gone, right?
We think.
Well, yeah, he's requested a trade. It could be done by the time you're listening to this. I would imagine that's going to happen in short order.
Okay.
So DK's gone. It just feels like Geno's, 34 maybe, mid-30s. Like, there's moments in an organization where you have a coach in his second year where it just kind of feels like this could be a reset for Seattle. This is an opportunity to reset. Now, the challenge is who's your quarterback at that point in time.
Right. They actually would be the team
Sam
that
Howell,
I think
you're gonna run
would
with?
extend for Sam Darnold maybe and would convince
Yeah,
themselves.
they could get into that. That's why this would have to happen pretty quick. But they could get in on
that. That hurts my feelings. But
what would you do though if, as the president of the Geno fan club and the president of the Sam Darnold haters club, if somehow Geno was out and Sam was in?
Well, I would just,
how do you deal with that?
Root against Sam Darnold next year, root for his demise, like I've been. It is very annoying that the Sam Darnold hive contains some of my favorite analysts in the country. Nate Tice, Mina Kimes. Yeah. Unfortunately, you're part of it too. So I don't get what they're seeing that you don't. Because Geno Smith would be atop this list for me. To me, he has played more consistently at a higher level playing. I think he's more of a complete quarterback than any of these guys.
And this goes to Cousins too. And again, this is why I love this conversation, because we can just see where it takes us and then go there. But I think there is a little bit of a market correction in terms of older quarterbacks, whereas you had Tom Brady. Well, you had Aaron Rodgers, first of all, playing MVP level, going up to the age of 40, like getting, towards 40. You had Tom Brady winning a Super Bowl after 40. And there was this kind of belief of like, these quarterbacks, they're all going to be great into their late 30s.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we saw Russell Wilson fall off a cliff. We saw Matt Ryan fall off a cliff. We saw Ben, when his thing happened, he had kind of fallen. You go back a little ways. The normal thing is most of these guys, when you get into their mid-30s, it starts to really tail off. Those guys, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, those were the exceptions.
Right, and even Aaron Rodgers, people are still betting on that now. If Aaron Rodgers plays for a team this year and plays well, he will be the most productive 41-year-old quarterback of all time behind Tom Brady, which is why I think he fits in New York with the Giants.
I don't know where else.
That's a desperation move.
I don't know who the Giants are going to have at quarterback. And I've had this conversation with a bunch of different people, and everybody says the same thing. It feels like Aaron Rodgers or bust.
But if they have Aaron Rodgers, do they move up or potentially take Cam Ward at 3?
I think if Cam Ward were there, they would take Cam Ward.
The longer we go in the process, and this is a good time to transition, let's look at the quarterbacks in your top 50.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong. The longer this goes on, you have Cam Ward as your 10th overall prospect, Shedeur Sanders at 18. So actually not that huge of a gap from our guy Jeremiah, 40 for Jackson Dart. The longer it goes on, the more I just think Cam Ward's going to be the number 1 overall draft pick. Not because he's
whether it's Tennessee or the Giants,
because people are making it out to be, okay, if you put him in last year's draft, where is he? Wouldn't he be right there with Penix and McCarthy at the least? And those guys went in the top 10. And so if you're telling me he's a top 10 talented quarterback, and everyone needs quarterbacks in this class, that
he's going to go. I mean, there's no question. He's going to be one of the first 3 picks in the draft.
Okay.
But I would take that to the bank.
What about 1?
No, I think there's a good chance of that. Whether or not that's Tennessee deciding to do it or whether that's somebody wanting to pay the price to go up.
All it takes is 1. So if the Giants if they don't get Rodgers, or even if they did get Rodgers, do you think Rodgers and Cam, would you trust? That's why I don't want to sign Rodgers at all. It's just too much of a headache. Him and the guy that you're trusting the future of your franchise, boxes you out.
Well, maybe we get some spice then. Maybe, as we're recording this, we're a few days away from free agency, right? There's enough of a window there. If I'm the Giants, I don't want to get caught with nothing. It literally is a game of musical chairs. And if you think you can make the move to go to number 1 to secure that you get Cam Ward, then okay, we do that. We don't worry about Aaron Rodgers. Let's just roll with who we're going to get with the first overall pick.
Make the move in March. You don't have to wait until
what I'm saying is, if you get the free agency and you're still sitting at pick number 3, and you're just saying, we'll just wait till the draft, well, then you better like more than 1 quarterback if that's the case.
So Shedeur Sanders might slip in this draft. He might not. I just said all the teams that need quarterbacks, and that's why I think.
Can I cut you off there, by the way? Because this is it's a popular TV segment. It's a popular conversation. How far will he slide? And the whole league, doesn't like Shedeur Sanders. And I'm like, do you realize, right? It only takes 1 team.
Sure.
You might have all the sources in the world. I don't care who you are. The most connected people in this business do not have rock solid, going to tell you the truth sources in all 32 buildings. So these people that are saying, well, he's going to do this or he's going to do that, I'm like, there's no way for anybody to know this. And I think this is a fit draft more than any other that I can ever remember. I think Shedeur Sanders is a really good fit for a team like the Raiders. I think he makes sense as a fit for a team like the Saints. So all it takes is 1 of those teams. So I don't buy in, and it's not just a Shedeur Sanders conversation, it's a player in general. When you hear everybody's punting on this guy and everybody's out on him, like, no, it takes 1 team.
Well, this class, I think, is going to have more disagreement up and down the board than any, because it feels like there's only 2 or 3 players that everyone agrees on. But to the quarterback point, just logically, Tennessee, Cleveland, Giants, Raiders, Jets, I'll throw the Saints in there. That's just in the top 9 picks. They all need quarterbacks, and I tend to agree with you. I tend to think that the Saints would maybe be the floor. I don't know if they're crazy enough, although Mickey Loomis has been known to make some crazy trades to trade up for Shedeur Sanders, but if he fell to 9.
Can I give you the sneaky quarterback team, though?
Please.
Because we were just talking about him with Seattle.
Okay.
I don't know who their guy would be. I don't know which, if that's, maybe that's more they want to take a flyer on somebody on the second day. Maybe that's Jackson Dart. Maybe that's, Tyler Shuck, one of those type of guys that you could get. Maybe you trade back a little bit, take one bottom of the first. Maybe you take one in the second round. But I was kind of just going through all these teams, and just because of the conversation we had about Geno getting a little bit older and not knowing if they could pivot, then all of a sudden you get another team that's in the quarterback mix a little bit.
So Seattle, picking at 18. They would theoretically have more draft capital because they've traded away DK Metcalf. Yeah. You could use that to make a move. I mean, I didn't mention it before though. There is one screaming logical team for Geno Smith, and it's his old buddy Pete Carroll. Like those two guys are
100%. That solves their problem. And now
those two guys are boys. I like that. I would accept that move for Geno Smith. I think that could work out.
Reunited,
they'd
man.
Spend a lot of money in free agency, like we mentioned. All the money that is out there we're going to see over the next week, but it will be interesting to see how teams spend at quarterback. I think the market's changed a little bit. I think the Daniel Jones contract was part of it, and then the Baker Mayfield contract, the first one he took with Tampa being so effective, was part of it. It's like, you don't have to pay Daniel Jones level quarterbacks, and I would consider Darnold or Fields like around that or a little lower. You don't have to pay them 85% of Joe Burrow. It doesn't make any sense.
It's really half what it is. I think $30 million is kind of that's going to be that veteran market.
Our salary cap is just costing these top-tier quarterbacks so much money, because you can't tell me that Patrick Mahomes is the same essentially as like the 8th quarterback in the league who gets that.
There's fun games.
Contract.
There's fun games to play though when you cross different positions and value and look at the numbers and then try and wrap your mind around it. Last year, my favorite was, I got a lot of texts that were saying, did the Eagles just get Saquon Barkley for Gabe Davis prices?
Right.
And I was like,
Dorrance Armstrong got more money than Saquon Barkley last year, which is why it was good they gave him more money.
They took care of him.
Speaking of weird dollars, Tutu Atwell signed. I just want to throw this out because I like
$10 million.
We're a news show too. Yeah. Tutu Atwell got $10 million. I have a feeling there were people around the league that were like, "What are you doing to us?"
Yeah, I had a decision maker that shot me. I was ahead of it. I sent him that contract, and then he was not. He was like, "Yeah, that didn't help." I think they had somebody else in mind for a price somewhat in that neighborhood, and I just said, "Yeah, if this is where the market is, you're not getting said player for that price."
He has about 1,000 yards through 4 years. Yeah. I feel like Sean McVay's been justifying that draft pick. I like Tutu Atwell. It was a nice development story that he improved to a solid 4th receiver, which he can be for them. And I guess he's more of a 3rd receiver for them if they pay him $10 million. But he's getting double the money of DeMarcus Robinson a year ago. DeMarcus Robinson was a better player. That tells me Sean McVay's got all the juice in the building.
Hold on now. I want to. This is real time here. What year was Tutu Atwell? 22?
Yeah, 4 years ago.
So 22. So I'm just going to see where I had him because I was curious on this because I like going through. Tutu Atwell.
He was a late 2nd round pick in the end, but a shocking one.
Very, very little.
Weighs about 10 more pounds.
You sure it was 22?
He's played 4 years in the league, so it would be 21.
21. It's the wrong year. I'm looking in the wrong file.
Can I give you a theory while you're looking?
Yeah, go for it.
It reminds me a lot of the Tavon Austin scene with Jeff Fisher in Hard Knocks, or I think it was off-season Hard Knocks, which probably only I watched, All or Nothing, where it was a great moment. Tavon Austin, this guy everyone called a bust, a developmental story, improved to like a pretty decent player, and they just loved him as a person. And so they gave him that contract. Everyone felt so good in the organization in the moment. It was almost worth it just for that moment. Ended up not being a very good contract at all. It reminds me of a light version of that. Everyone probably loves Tutu Atwell. It's a great moment, but it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, Tutu Atwell was my 79th player. So you said he went like in the 50s?
In the 50s.
So he was just under 5'9", 155 pounds, ran a 4.35 at his pro day. I talked about jet sweeps. He's dynamic. He can separate. He's got a second gear ball in the air. He's got some route polish. He was a high school quarterback. Throw the ball 70 yards on his knees. Just threw that in there for fun.
They haven't used that.
But I said he was a miniature T.Y. Hilton. That's who. Like if you're hoping that he was gonna be, like he hasn't been.
He's turned into a pretty good role player. Rams fans and the front office will defend him as he stretches the field and that opens it up and he's improved. Like, so he's basically a good number 4 getting like good number 3 money, I guess.
Can I give you a fun podcast topic?
Sure.
What if you just did a tournament, like it was a fighting tournament but the lightweight division.
Yeah.
So you have like Calvin Austin versus Tutu Atwell in round 1 squaring off. Who would you rather have? I'm just saying,
that would be fun to watch.
Idea
I thought you were going to
generator.
throw me in the mix.
It's an
'cause
idea generator.
I'm like a little below that weight class. They've got a little more muscle.
It's not an idea worthy of the watch that you're wearing, but it is definitely something I'm aspiring to.
Okay, so we are going to wrap up this show with an exercise that I'm excited about. We're going to talk about building around some of these young quarterbacks in the league. And all 3 of them are in the top 10 of the draft. In terms of their team is picking in the top 10 of the draft. The Patriots are at number 4. They're there with Drake Maye. Trevor Lawrence, who frankly we're being a little generous calling him a young quarterback at this point, like he's 2 years into his second contract, and this is what I was talking about. Everyone gets like Patrick Mahomes money. Trevor Lawrence is making the same money as like Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes.
Crazy.
It doesn't really help your team building. And Caleb Williams is the 10th pick of the draft in terms of the Bears. And we're going to go through, and I'm going to suggest some team building I want to see in free agency. I'm the free agent GM.
Okay.
You can grade my free agent general manager jobs. And then when we get to the draft portion, we'll see how I did, and you'll choose what you want to do building around these guys in the draft. So Drake Maye, let's start there. Number 4 overall pick. The number 1 thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trade for DK Metcalf.
Yep. And I'm going to tell you what you're going to trade. You're going to trade the 38th pick.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that could get it done.
I think that would get it done.
Supposedly
you gotta pay him.
He wants to play for a contender, and
I don't know if DK's going to love that, but that's, if I'm the Patriots, 38th pick, make that move.
they've got Mike Vrabel. They've got a lot of targets available because they've got 3 or 4 guys who probably profile well as a number 3 receiver, but not even a number 2 at this point. You've got a quarterback who loves to throw it deep, throw it to the outside. It's a nice fit. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, I'm going to sign and maybe overpay Cam Robinson or Morgan Moses if Cam Robinson just gets too crazy. And these guys aren't going to change my life, but it's what they didn't do a year ago.
Yeah.
They had a terrible plan where they had no backup plan. They had no even starting plan. And to me, this is more of a backup plan. You want to develop, it would not stop you from drafting.
Still taking alignment, I'll get there.
Right, it would not stop you from drafting a tackle, but at least it just, okay, there's 1 tackle spot. They need 2 tackle spots filled.
Man, I saw them with the Chargers last year up close and personal. That is a rough supporting group that he's got there, especially at the tackle position. So I like that. Anybody else you want to lob in there?
I mean, Ronnie Stanley they would have liked to get, but I feel like that's going to go too much. And then I'm looking on the defensive side of the ball too. So it's not just building around Drake Maye. I think Nick Bolton would make sense for them as like a 3-down linebacker. You want to be building with younger players, and they need edge players. I'm going Mountain Kuntz as well. So it's not build up the defense as part of helping Drake Maye out. When you look at the wide receiver position in free agency, I don't know. I guess you could sign one, but they all just profile as other guys. Like they've gone this route before, taking the lower tier, like Josh Palmer type. Like they don't need another one of those. I don't
think Devontae Adams, is in a hurry to go to New England. The one name that I think would be kind of interesting for them from a receiver standpoint, I know it wasn't great last year in terms of the production, but Keenan Allen just is kind of a veteran who can still get open on some 3rd downs. I think at a relative cost, that would make some sense to me.
Bears fans got on him early in the year. I tell you, if you watch the end of that season, Caleb trusted Keenan Allen.
That's where the ball went.
He kind of played himself into either shape or figuring out that offense. And by the end of the year, it was like, okay, I agree with you. He could make some sense. Let's go to Trevor Lawrence.
Well, hold on. I get to do my draft with these guys.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna take the 2nd round pick's gone, so we've already acquired DK Metcalf, so that's taken care of. And now you've got between now and the draft to decide if you want Armand Membo, if you want Will Campbell. So we're committed to taking an offensive lineman with that.
Are they?
Now you could trade back.
Are they
a
a difference maker enough?
There's such an upgrade, and you're not going to have to worry about them. So you've got a starter plug and place for 8 to 10 years. Like they can't trot out there what they had last year, and you have to. We just talked about it at the top of the show. If you want an offensive tackle, you got to pay the premium. It might be a little bit earlier than you want to. If you want one in free agency, you're gonna cost more than you want to. But they can't run out there Drake Maye behind this group. They can't.
Membo seems a little more exciting to me. Seems a little more like
he is very talented.
And you could put him at right tackle. You put Cam Robinson at left tackle.
There you go. So we just solved the solved the Patriots there. What else you want to do here?
Let's do Trevor Lawrence. They have the 5th overall pick in the draft. They actually have a lot of guard need on this team, and I think they should take a lesson from the team we're going to talk about next and take care of some of it before the draft. A couple guards that I think would be out there. James Daniels actually played really well for the Steelers before he had a major injury, and maybe they can afford to kind of wait for him to get healthy. So that's one guard name that stuck out to me. Another possible option there would be just like a short-term fix, like a Kevin Zeitler, just to like come in for a year while you draft and develop guys. I actually don't love that I've heard Aaron Banks is going for like $18 million. That seems like not a great idea, but at least one guard in free agency.
Yeah, Zeitler's interesting to me because I thought the Bears would be a Zeitler team because of the Ben Johnson connection. Obviously, they've gone another direction with the 2 trades that they've made. The Chargers have a need inside at guard, and Zeitler was with Ortiz back in Baltimore, so there's an understanding there. I could see that one making some sense. So he's going to have a market. I was almost even wondering with them, what happens with Mekhi Becton? Is that a flyer you'd be willing to take? But as someone who can help you run the ball, because last year the Jags, we can talk about Trevor and his issues. They couldn't run the ball. They were 26th in rushing yards per game.
And yet running back's like one of the positions that they're pretty set.
They've got
they're
backs.
good.
So they should be more productive in the run game than they are, which means they're not getting any push up front.
I think they could be a team also that looks for a center. So centers in this market, Drew Dahlman is probably costing too much money, but you played Ryan Kelly twice a year. Maybe that's a veteran you bring in. Mitch Morse, this was surprising news that came out on Thursday, decided to retire. Struggled with injuries last year, maybe didn't play as well as his contract that they were hoping for coming out of Buffalo. So they basically have to fix their whole interior line in one offseason. Josh Myers is a guy that's also out there from Green Bay. Would not surprise me if they spend there as well. And then I think they have their one in Brian Thomas. I think they could use a little bit of depth. I don't want them to go crazy at the top of the market. I actually thought your guy, Josh Palmer, in LA always could have been like a little better.
Yeah, he always wanted just a little bit more.
He could be a rotation guy for a decent team, don't you think?
I think there's a lot of similar players there, so where do you put that price tag?
Tutu Atwell money? Would you?
I don't think I would go there.
You would not for Josh Palmer. And then on the defensive side of the ball, because I decided I'm taking this beyond just helping the quarterbacks. They need some interior pass rushers. They actually, I think, are in a beautiful position with this new regime, Liam Cohen, where I actually don't think this team has a ton of screaming needs. They just have like pretty good players across the board, and they need to upgrade their overall talent. So Levi Onwuzurike, I think, could be a fit there. Puna Ford, I would throw out there. Like, they could use interior rusher, like Javon Hargrave. They're not obviously going to sign all these guys, but maybe one from that bucket and then one from the safety bucket. Do you go a little top of the market with Trevon Moehrig, who's a good young player trying to like establish? Maybe he would be like a plus starter in free agency.
Yeah, I think Moehrig's going to get a lot more money than people think.
And I think Jacksonville might be spending a lot in free agency.
I like that. I like that move. And where they're picking, they got the 5th pick, right, with Jacksonville. So we've talked about him. I'm higher on him than Gregg is, because Gregg doesn't go watch the playoff games from the previous year. But Mason Graham, to me, makes some sense for them along the defensive tackle position. I also think with where their needs lie, they could be a trade-back team. Now, the challenge in this draft is who's coming up for who. To me, you could hope that there's some heat on the 2 tackles because it's a limited tackle pool. Maybe somebody moves up for one of those guys. Maybe you could just slide back a little bit.
Okay. This will be a running.
I also like Jalen Walker because I wouldn't mind seeing him reunited there with Trayvon Walker. And we have the Walker boys just getting after it, the Georgia Bulldogs out there for him.
It's funny because Trayvon Walker is, in theory, up for an extension this year, although they have him on the 5th year deal.
He's turned into a good player.
He's turned into a good player. I wonder if they'll extend it. The fact that it's a new regime there, sort of. A lot of Trent Baalke's guys are still there in the personnel department. Maybe doesn't help him, but that would be interesting. Let's wrap with Caleb Williams.
They've already been going to work before we could even get the segment.
Yeah, so they add 2 guards, Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney, and yet I think they could in the draft. That's up to you, because these guys are maybe short-term solutions. They're another team I think could look at a center. They still look very thin at center. Go with Ryan Kelly there. I actually don't think they have huge needs in free agency, so I would say save your money on offense, because They have two receivers that they really like. If you're adding a receiver, it's maybe like a Mac Hollins type. I just think good vibes, like a fourth receiver.
Put no shoes. The thing with the Bears, and I'll put this to our resident Bears fan who we work with, not to be mentioned, but we were talking about the needs they have on the defensive side of the ball. And my argument was, this is year 1 of Ben Johnson, year 2 of Caleb Williams. If next year at this time, Caleb Williams is coming off of 4,500 yards and everybody in your organization and in your city knows that he's the guy and you guys win 6 or 7 games, that is a successful season. Fans aren't going to want to hear that, but that's just plain the facts. So when you look at resources, free agency, the draft, I am doing everything in my power. You've already hired the coach to help him. You've already made 2 trades to help him. If I have to be a little bit lopsided offensively versus defensively with resources, I've got to get this guy playing well. So that's where in free agency and the draft, I'm tilting to the offense.
Yeah, and actually, they have needs at safety, which is a position where maybe you could get a decent player without spending a lot of money. We talked about the top of the safety market, but there are guys, towards the back, like a Jeremy Chin or a Xavier Woods, like guys who can play that I think they could use. I don't see crazy needs. They have Dennis Allen now running their defense, so maybe you go cheap for his old friend Marcus Davenport, just as a second edge rusher, like 1 year.
Marcus Davenport always has a market.
This time,
everybody's because if he could just stay healthy, he could, he always has a market.
I'm talking about bargain basement shopping, because ultimately, I think they're showing us their priority is that offensive line. He has already made those huge moves, and I think they've done a nice job quickly.
Can I give you 3 names for him in the draft real quick? So these would be, talk about helping your quarterback. And the first one would be Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. You trade back a little bit, I think he's going to be the best center in the draft. He's really good. He was excellent at the Senior Bowl.
Why not just at 10 then?
I would not have a problem with that. He's inching his way up my list.
How about the centers doing so well in last year's class? Do you think that could have some impact?
It doesn't hurt. Yeah, Tampa got that
Supposedly that's supposed to be a position that takes forever to work out, but Zach Frazier was awesome right away, and Graham Barton, as you're mentioning.
Because those guys played a crap ton of football. And that's one of the things we've seen. It's the impact of COVID, NIL, all the other stuff going with it, that these guys have all played a zillion games. Gray Zabel's played a ton of games, and they do a lot of pro-style stuff. He's played, you can play up and down the line at every position at North Dakota State. So that one, I think you could get him even if you traded back a little bit. I mentioned Ashton Genty there. I know you've got solid running backs, but he takes you to another level with what you have with him. Coming out of Boise State. And then Tyler Warren, knowing you have Cole Kmet, but let's be a 12 personnel team. We've got a creative offensive coordinator. You line up and you've got Tyler Warren and Cole Kmet who can both block as well as be weapons in the passing game. And then you've got DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. Like, that's kind of fun all of a sudden.
I love all those picks. I love that they're going to be in a good position to take offense. And yes, I agree, DeAndre Swift and Cole Kmet I would put in the bucket of guys that would not prevent you from
No, if you get an elite player, go get him.
Go get him. Jeremiah, he's elite at what he does. Although I expected you to come at me a little harder on this show.
No, it's fine.
Honestly, I like that. That's kind of what gets me going. It's like,
I'll be honest with you, I was so blinded by the watch, I couldn't even formulate thoughts at some point.
That's not even a takedown. We're going to be doing 40s and free agents every single week throughout the draft process, unless Jeremiah gets sick of me. We will talk to you after the free agency frenzy.